gentlemen. If everybody could take a seat, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Collier Neely. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Landmarks Foundation here in Montgomery. I'm introducing Margaret Lynne Ausfeld, Senior Curator of Art at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. She has written extensively about the art and material culture of the Southeast, including bill of trailer, drawings from the collections of the High Museum of Art and the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, and History Refused to Die, the enduring legacy of African American art in Alabama. She has authored the 2006 publication, American Paintings from the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, and has curated exhibitions of the works of Traylor, Edward Hopper, and others represented here at the MMFA. Ausfeld holds a BA in European History from the University of Alabama and an MA in Museum Studies and Art History from George Washington University. Her lecture today is on New South and the Dixie Art Colony.
Okay, I've been encouraged to speak directly into the microphone, and I always follow instructions. So, first of all, let me thank all of you for coming today. We're about to wrap up our program, and I hope all of you feel the way I do, that this has just been an amazing experience. It's been amazing for me. Thank you. And I just want to throw the thanks to the team that put this together, led by Ed Bridges and Al Head. All of us worked really collegially together to get this program started, and then so many people picked up the baton, including, and I want everybody to give a really big hand to Alice Novak, our Curator of Education. Yeah. Let me just say, Alice managed to get married and run a symposium within a month. That tells you something. Okay, so I'm here today to talk to you about a couple of groups of artists who were active in the Montgomery area in the 1930s. And I want to first start by thanking someone very specifically, and that's Mark Harris, who's back there in the back. Who shared with me some really wonderful photographs of members of the Dixie Art Colony at the colony and in process, and runs an organization out in Wetumpka called the Dixie Art Colony Foundation. So if you want more information about the Dixie Art Colony and their work, the best source for that is to go to dixieartcolony.org. Great. Made it easy. You don't even have to really think about that. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the Dixie Art Colony, and as you can see, they had like their little sign. Everybody been to the lakes up Jordan, Martin? Don't those little signs just happen everywhere? Like little signs that have not this road, don't turn here. Well, there was a sign for the Dixie Art Colony that was intended to take those people to a place they really wanted to be. On the left is a beautiful image of the artist Charles Shannon working on the mural that he painted for the New South Gallery exhibition of the work of Bill Traylor. So we're going to talk today about those two groups. So Montgomery in the 1930s was a true city of the Deep South, and for the dominant social order at that time, change was only reluctantly tolerated. Eventually it was accepted, but it was rarely embraced. The rural countryside outside of Montgomery in central Alabama would have appeared even more frozen in time. There were many and multiple social structures that existed in tandem in those places. And time-honored conventions and cultural traditions survived there stubbornly, even as the world around them bustled toward modernity. So this is an image of Court Square, downtown 1 year, about 1929, before the decade we're going to be discussing. This is a story, an abridged one at that, of how two groups of artists produced art in and around Montgomery in the 1930s, how their relationships formed and flourished, and how their art preserves contrasting perspectives on their lives, their fellow Alabamians' lives, and a shared culture. So here I'm showing you two images. One at the bottom is an actual photograph of cotton wagons in Court Square, which was probably taken sometime in the earliest part of the 20th century. Not really sure about the exact date of that. It probably does have a date, and I bet you Carol King could tell us, but it's an early photograph of Court Square where the cotton is still being brought in by mule-drawn wagon. And I was informed by somebody who really knows, because they live in the country, that mule-drawn wagons were used well into the 20th century on unpaved roads in the country because cars would get stuck. Mules could be convinced to go on. Bringing cotton bales to market is the picture that you see on the right by the artist Anne Goldthwait, whose name has been mentioned more than once today. For generations, Montgomery's economy was rooted in the agrarian economy of the surrounding Black Belt. Many lives were centered around the cultivation and marketing of cotton. However, the Great Depression was in its early days at the dawn of the 1930s. City dwellers' lives were, even though based in service industries or commerce, were at minimum disrupted and sometimes shattered by the impact of widespread economic collapse that threatened the entire country. Ironically, rural Alabama families may have felt somewhat less impacted than those in larger metropolitan areas and places dependent on manufacturing. Historically, poverty was endemic in Alabama. As a state, it struggled due to the economic stagnation resulting from the Civil War and its aftermath, and a continued reliance on cotton farming as a primary source of revenue. The boll weevil infestation, you will remember the monument. I'm not showing it to you because I know you all know it, that entered the state in 1910 had spread statewide by 1916, and it led to an eventual decline of cotton as the state's major cash crop. The Great Depression intensified this problem by depressing the price of that commodity. This is a photograph by the photographer Lewis Hine of a mill family. This is not a sharecropping or tenant farming family. Those are kind of typical, shown in this way, but this is a mill family up near Anniston. This resulted, the depression basically, resulted in the collapse of the existing system of sharecropping and tenant farming, which had provided a meager livelihood for rural families, both black and white. The financial collapse of 1929 merely intensified the poverty that already held a large share of Alabamians in its grasp. This is a beautiful Walker Evans in our collection of a street scene in 1935 in Selma. The Art Museum in Montgomery was founded in 1930 by an alliance of artists and citizens, primarily to serve as an institutional hub for community artists and art lovers. John Kelly Fitzpatrick, an artist from Elmore County, whose family had long-standing ties to Alabama, worked with friends to create an institution that enabled him to teach art in the art school that he conveniently founded with the museum, as well as to provide a place for himself and his students to exhibit their work. This lovely piece is in our archive. The ladies and their hats, are looking at what appeared to be students' drawings, I would say there. And this photograph is from right after the museum was founded. This generation, which also included artists such as Anne Goldthwait and Clara Weaver Parrish, who lived outside of the state at that time, as Graham has shared with us, that generation was rooted in the heritage of the landed gentry of Alabama. Their shared backgrounds and the financial support that background created for them was an inherent support system that was specific to their time and their place. Because of this shared social system of support, Kelly Fitzpatrick was enabled to conceive of the Dixie Art Colony and bring it to life. Kelly Fitzpatrick was 45 years old when he began to promote the idea of a place for artists to work communally and acquire art skills. Kelly had returned from World War I severely injured by shrapnel, and he took a long time to recover and basically decided he wanted to devote himself to what he wanted to do. And he had the means to be able to do that with the help of his friends. He was a part of what was called the 12th Machine Gun Battalion at the Battle of Meuse-Argonne, and that was where he was so severely wounded that in photographs of him, you can see his face and his chest are severely scarred. So I had a good friend who said to me after seeing some photographs that I'm going to show you soon of him surrounded by a coterie of students in the Dixie Art Colony, my friend said, well, either adoration by a bevy of lady artists or PTSD, which do you want? So apparently he avoided that fate and very well by creating an art colony with the support of his friends. A 1935 postcard announcement stated that artists could receive instruction in drawing, painting, composition, color, landscape, portrait, and still life. That's at the Dixie Art Colony. That was a little postcard saying what you could do when you were there. Fitzpatrick was the founder of the Dixie Art Colony with the cooperation of Sally Boyd Carmichael, a member of his same social universe. She and other friends provided the organizational, administrative, and financial support that made it possible for Fitzpatrick to devote himself to teaching art. For about 10 years, between the mid-1930s and the mid-1940s, the colony met in rural areas of central Alabama, primarily at Lakes Martin and Jordan. This is a wonderful photograph of a place called Lane's Store in DEATSVILLE. So if you all are familiar with the Lake District there, you will recognize DEATSVILLE, if not Lane's Store. But it's a beautiful image of folks resting in the shade. That's a common denominator. Have you noticed in the pictures we've been showing today? Lots of people resting in the shade. It took its name from the first site, Camp Dixie, a former Boy Scout camp on Lake Martin. And beginning in 1937, the colony finally settled in a series of buildings about 15 miles from Wetumpka at the Nobles Ferry on Lake Jordan. So this is a quote from an artist who was a participant in the colony and a male artist who sometimes participated and sometimes I think taught some as well, Carl Wolf. And you can read it there. He was the life of the colony. He took nothing seriously. He laughed at politics, business, status, ambition, ego, pride, and vanity. My favorite is when someone came who seemed rather taut, meaning high-strung or unhappy, he would shoot off firecrackers in the fireplace or throw rocks on the tin roof until the one who was taut either relaxed or left. That's the way to handle it, right? So you get the picture of Kelly. The artists who attended the Dixie Art Colony sessions were largely amateurs, but several were very gifted and developed their talents significantly over time. Other guest teachers participated from time to time, including, guess who? Ann Goldthwait. When she came home to visit her family, she'd wander up to the lake for a while, sit in. Mark Harris has some wonderful photographs of her drawing mules. And if I had not had so many slides, you would have seen a photograph of Ann drawing mules, for sure. And so she would occasionally visit. Richard Coe, whose work was extensively discussed by Caitlin this morning. Carl Wolfe, the gentleman who's quoted here. Lamar Dodd. And notably, Frank Appleby, who many of you will know was a founding member of the art faculty at what was called the Alabama Polytechnic Institute at the time, API, now known as, that school in the East. I'm sorry. In deference to David, who teaches there, Auburn University. Yes, only recent. Well, there was some serious discussion of art theory that happened at the colony. Most of that discussion centered on traditionalist styles rather than modernist movements incorporating abstraction, which did not find support from Kelly nor most of the other people there. I'm being kind. They had some pretty saucy things to say about modernism, but I'm just going to let that slide here. So here you go. The Yuletide party is indicative of an atmosphere that could be reasonably described as conservative, both in terms of art produced as well as the approach to life embraced by the participants. There was a concerted effort to create a positive environment enlivened by good cheer and camaraderie. People who were taught need not show up. This was made possible since the people who participated were basically members of a single elite class and somewhat insulated from politics and the economic and international turmoil of the times around them. In this photograph you're seeing here, that fellow there to the right is Frank Appleby, and the person here in the turban is Arthur Stewart, who was the student of Hannah Elliott that Graham was talking about earlier. I got that right, didn't I? Yeah, I got good. Thank you. So they are both there, along with the required bevy of ladies who were the basic student in the group. Okay. The world of the Dixie Art Colony was basically that of summer camp, with the artists setting out daily in good weather to paint the surrounding countryside or working within a building, a residence building that was converted to a large studio for the group. Sorry, I should have told you. This wagon was a wagon that was connected to some form of transport, car, truck, mule, something, and it was taken away from the colony with the artist's supplies in it, and the colonists were then dropped at various places around the camp in order to paint for the day. And if they were going to be gone all day, they made them a lunch. So this was for going out and painting out in the environment. We'll see a picture of that in just a second. But if you wanted to stay home, he would set up still life for you. And this is one that was painted by Mildred Nungesser, who later married Carl Wolfe. And it's, as you can see, titled Kelly's Hat. So when he ran out of things to put in the still life, clearly the hat went in the mix. And you often will see Kelly wearing that hat in photographs. So it was always with him, apparently. But you can see, I'm saying these people were amateurs, and they were. But some of them were actually very, very serious amateurs. And this is a beautiful painting. I think you can see a lot of influence in the way the paint is handled in this painting, the brush strokes, and the kind of contouring that goes on. But that fruit right there, you can basically channel in your mind Paul Cézanne in France. And I should say, that was the thing that Kelly brought back with him was an intense love for fauve painters and some of the post-impressionist painters like Cezanne, for sure. But this is what a Kelly Fitzpatrick and a Dixie Art Colony painting were really meant to be. The brilliant coloration and emphasis on bright, sunny expanses of water and landscape were reflections of Kelly Fitzpatrick's own work. His practice of painting en plein air, and in his term, escaping the stuffy studio, was modeled on 19th century European practice and was obviously extremely well suited to this environment. The wagon that we saw took people like these two ladies right here to a site on the lake or outside of the lake in the countryside in order to paint for a day. So they were engaged in making these paintings. So it's interesting, I'm kind of curious, and Mark might know this, whether or not they went back to the same site multiple days, because look how much this artist has done here on this painting on the right. It looks extremely well captured for a day of painting, even if this is the end of the day. But again, they were painting kind of directly on the canvas, probably without a lot of preliminary sketching. So this may have been typical for that style of working. It's a beautiful environment. During the mid-1930s, when Kelly Fitzpatrick and other professional artists worked within the programs sponsored by the WPA, and we've had many mentions of that today, the relief agency that supported artists' work during the Depression, there was also a specific emphasis on painting subjects favored by those agencies, which were industrial sites, as Caitlin mentioned, and this would have qualified as an industrial site, by the way. The industrial site of the steel mill was one, but this was the rural industrial site, as they interpreted it. So this is the Beeline pottery, and this would have fit the guidelines of the Federal Arts Project or the WPA for a work that they would have approved, as would some landscape, but also any subjects that were associated with national or state history were preferred. So Kelly did a number of industrial sites, but as you can see here, this photograph preserves a site that's very utilitarian. Looks rather ominous, actually. It's kind of ramshackled, breaking down. You know, it doesn't look like something that an artist would look at and say, gee, I want to paint that, right? If you're trying to paint something beautiful. Well, Kelly was the person who could kind of negotiate that, let's say. He would put beautiful sky. He would make sure the coloration in the foreground was blended beautifully with the beiges and the greens that he saw. Bright, bright sunlight, always. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, has anybody ever seen a rainy day painting by Kelly Fitzpatrick? I'm pretty sure not. But I love what he did with placing the single pot there in the foreground with the shadow to just kind of establish the grounds of the painting. It's a masterful effort, really. He was an extremely talented, not just as a painter, but in composing his compositions as well, I think. So, after the death of Sally B. Carmichael, a colony was organized by Wari LeBron, who was her daughter, in 1947 at Nobles Ferry. She died the previous year. Subsequently, Kelly worked with the artist Genevieve Sutherland, and you saw a portrait by Genevieve also in Graham's talk, to host a series of colonies on the Gulf Coast. Sutherland is seen in this photograph right here, painting another artist who taught etching, Walter Keith, at the colonies. So this is an image of the colony, I believe, at Bayou La Battery in around 1946. So you can see they sort of overlapped a couple of years where there was a colony at the lake and a colony down there. But eventually the colonies shifted to the coast. This first was a very small group that met at Bayou La Battery in 1945. And I think this is a later photograph, probably from the following year or maybe even the year after that. And you can see Kelly Fitzpatrick is the man that's standing back there on the right side. And he's clearly down at the Gulf Coast and not on the lake in this photograph. So again, this is my quintessential image of Kelly surrounded by his bevy of beauties, learning to paint. And they all look so happy, right? I mean, they do. They're really having a good time. But he's kind of teaching them probably something about how you paint the sky is what it looks like. What do you put in first? What do you put in second? That kind of a technical talk here that is focused on technique that they might simply gain from. He kept doing that. Basically, he didn't, I was told, so much give lessons as he gave feedback. He would get people started and then kind of guide them as they did it. So in some ways, I think that was really wonderful, but of course, they all wanted to paint like him. So realistically, even if he might not have intended to teach them to paint like him, he basically taught them to paint like he did. So the group also met at Coden. That's probably where this photograph was taken on the coast from 1950 to 1953. And 1953 was the year of his death. So after that point, there were efforts made to kind of keep artists going down to the coast and and working with Genevieve and other folks down there. Carlos Alpha, Shiny Moon, was an artist who helped her, I think, to kind of keep that tradition going for a while. But eventually, it sort of died. So when we're looking at the world of the Dixie art colony, we're basically seeing a reflection of the perspective of the ruling class of Alabama that prevailed at that time. The colonists were white artists of privilege who associated with one another somewhat exclusively and formed relationships based upon their position in that cultural milieu. Negro baptizing is an example of how these artists related to Alabama's minority black culture. Alabamians who lived with but not in their culture. As seen here, figures of African Americans were frequently seen as integrated and part of a larger environment and landscape. In many of Kelly's paintings, including Monday Morning, which I showed you earlier, frequently the black figures lack facial features. Their bodies and their roles were defined in the same way as the landscape was described as part of a perceived natural order. So we're going to move on to a completely different group of artists. And this group is somewhat younger, but they overlapped in terms of their work here in Central Alabama. The second group is called New South. And I will say, it gets published New South Gallery a lot. That's because Yankees found out about it and they started making things up. Because they didn't know any better, so we're going to forgive them. The title of the group is New South, period. There's no gallery, there's no school, there's no nothing attached to it. Almost simultaneously, another group of artists were working in Central Alabama, 3 of them having studied outside of the state and having returned. The group, known as New South, was incorporated in 1939 with goals and an artistic philosophy that contrasted quite markedly with that of the generation represented by Kelly Fitzpatrick and Ann Goldthwait. Here you can see I've put in red their goals: the establishment of a social program among its members to promote the arts and perform acts authorized under the law. One of you lawyers out there will tell me why it's necessary that they post that, but I'm sure that it was. New South was composed of visual artists, writers, and musicians who embraced the role of the arts in addressing issues of social justice and equity. At the top center of this photograph is John Lapsley, then a young artist from Selma who had studied both in Washington, D.C. at the Phillips Collection School and in 1935 in New York at the National Academy of Design. And those of you who were with us last night will remember the memorial portrait of his distant relative that was painted by George Cook and is hanging now in the Alabama Landscape Show in the galleries. So it's a wonderful 19th, 21st century kind of connection of SELMA, art, and Alabama, for sure. He, John, was joined in New York by another native of SELMA, Crawford Gillis, who also studied at the National Academy of Design. Both joined the New South group in the summer of 1939. And here, this is Blanche, Bazell, thank you, on the right. And then the Sandersons are here Paul and Mattie Mae are here in the foreground. They were writers rather than visual artists. These two were joined by a third visual artist who also studied outside of the South. Charles Shannon, who attended the Cleveland School of Art from 1932 to 1936, was raised in the South, but went to art school in Cleveland and was near relatives in Ashtabula who rather helped to give him some emotional support when he went that far away from home to study. Shannon had lived in rural Butler County in Alabama in the summer of 1935 and had spent a considerable amount of time among the black community there as he built a cabin on land that was given to him by his uncle. That's a picture of him. I don't think, it's obviously not summer, right? It's some other colder period of time. The artists of New South had all grown up in somewhat more informal social settings in which African Americans were allied and interpersonal relationships created close ties. The social inequities were more keenly appreciated by these artists, and they felt more immediately the suffering of Alabamians, black and white, in the face of the economic hardships that were made even more dire by the Great Depression. Charles Shannon's statement about the lover, this painting which is in our collection and is on view in the gallery right behind me here, encapsulates the role that empathy played in his art as well as the art of the other New South members. He said, "It isn't like something I saw and decided to paint. It's a visual experience that won't verbalize. We are all lovers in one way or another, and this painting is an aspect of being a lover." So what he essentially, I think, interpreting to a certain amount, was saying, suffering is part of the human estate, and we all suffer, black, white, every race. We're all human. Crawford Gillis's work was more overtly political than Shannon's, but his attitude toward the impact of poverty and racism set him apart from many other Southern painters of the 1930s. These are two works that are also in our collection. You can see a woman who is clearly, it's very hot. She's got her child sleeping in her lap, covered by a newspaper, probably to keep flies away. And then this other is a rather ironically and sarcastically called The Study for a Southern Armory. And we can see a black man who is clearly terrified being led away by probably the National Guard. Unlike Charles Shannon, whose interest was primarily in the black community and culture, Gillis also addressed the plight of poor whites who labored in factories and on subsistence farms. This is a painting, again, in our collection that shows a family, and given the attitude of the family and their clothing, probably they may have been evicted or are walking past a mill that may have closed down, and there's no longer any support from that for that family. These are two paintings, early paintings by John Lapsley. Both Gillis and Lapsley were very much influenced by contemporary trends in American art, including works by Mexican muralist painters such as Diego Rivera. They brought these approaches back to Alabama from their art school experiences and translated the muralists' socio-political based aesthetic to the local communities that they knew so intimately. This is, again, a picture from our collection of a young girl holding a baby, who is clearly, both of them are rather upset. And the way the paint is applied intensifies the fact that that is what is happening, that this child is crying. And then you have a rather contrasting image of a young boy who is feeding cherries to birds. And this is a painting that was made in the mural style on plaster. So it's a fresco painting, basically. It's very small, but very beautiful, too. So this is an image of Charles Shannon that was taken, obviously, much later by a photographer named Jerry SIEGEL. And here also is an image that was made at an exhibition of these artists' work of this period that happened down at the State Arts Council. And they all three were still in the world at that time, and they had their pictures taken together, which is a really wonderful historical artifact for me as an art museum curator and historian to be able to see these three men together like this. Charles Shannon is the figure obviously on the right, John is in the middle, and Crawford Gillis is on the left. I actually had the honor of knowing all of them, and they were universally wonderful men. So New South was very short-lived. World War II was the defining event of the middle of the 20th century on the world stage in Alabama and in the world at large, the United States at large as well. Lives were changed by the disruption of military service, and this was the case for all three of these artists as well. When they returned to Alabama after their military service, all three men's art evolved and matured. Well, and I say matured, it changed. I'm not exactly sure if they felt that they had a maturation process or if they simply made peace with the fact that they had done what they needed to do in that time period and then wanted to move on to other styles of work. But each of them's work did change fairly radically. So all of them came to paint in styles that were quite different than this. If you look at the images of works that I just showed you by Crawford Gillis, for example, there on the screen, and you go back to the Alabama landscape show, you'll see an image of a steamboat that he painted on the Alabama River there at SELMA that is quite a different perspective and quite a different image. But he was able to do that and to succeed in doing that, and I think he felt fulfilled by continuing to do his art in whatever way made most sense to him, I guess, at the time. So this is the coda of Dixie, Art Colony, New South, and beyond. The world of art changed and changed again and changed again, everywhere, including in Alabama. In 1982, Charles Shannon and his wife Eugenia gave the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts 30 drawings made in the late 1930s on a street corner in downtown Montgomery, very much under the radar. The artist, Bill Traylor, was one of the artists who had an exhibition of his work in the gallery at New South, one of the few artists whose shows were installed there prior to its actual closing. This, of course, is one of the very famous images of Bill Traylor drawing that has been published quite a lot, with a little child with him. There you go. And here you can see, again, that is a watercolor, it's a gouache actually, image that was painted by Charles Shannon as a preparatory study for the mural you saw him working on in that opening slide that was painted there in the gallery. In the center is an installation photograph of the works in the gallery. And of course on the right, someone asked me the other day ago, what's your favorite painting in the museum? Show me your favorite painting in the museum. And I had to think real hard, and I said, well, I don't think I have a favorite painting in the museum. But when I was looking and preparing this slide, I went, what's my favorite trailer? And that's it. I think it's the purple. I don't know what it is. It does it for me, that wonderful big eye, right, with the purple body. So his work, Traylor's work, had been collected and had been saved by Shannon who, along with his New South colleagues, had encountered Bill Traylor on Monroe Street, a couple of blocks north of Court Square, in what was then the Black business district of Montgomery. Shannon created that mural painting of the artist at work on the walls of the gallery as a tribute to him. It was later destroyed. Traylor's work, however, survives and is now part of museum collections, not just here in Montgomery, but internationally in many major collections of 20th century American art. So, the story goes on. It was a world that was separate and divided in the 1930s, but within it, art thrived in a multitude of modes of expression, and it survives today, all of it, to tell the stories of the men and women who made it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Margaret Lynne. We've got a few minutes for questions. If anybody, right over there. All right, if you'll wait until I get to you so I can give you the mic. I'm a little slower now that it's been all day.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was fabulous, and I really learned a lot about those two groups. But this last picture got me to thinking, and I was thinking about New South and the Dixie group's relationship to photography. Mm-hmm. Because one could argue that we can understand how abstraction, they had a hard time with that.
Yes.
But when you're looking at some of these powerful photographs that were taken mm-hmm. during the same time period by people like Walker Evans and the like,
yes.
That's modern art.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how did they, what was their response to these really bold, and also thinking about people like Eudora Welty too?
Well, I'm not quite sure I can answer that question when it comes to the artists of the Dixie Art Colony, because we're looking at photographs of them made by other people. And I have a feeling that some of those images may have been made by people like Frank Appleby or Lamar Dodd or some of those other artists who were there in the environment and simply had the ability and the acuity to be able to capture those wonderful images in the way that they did. Quite different in terms of the New South. I think that Charles Shannon is very much recognized for his photography on Monroe Street, and specifically for the the images that he made of Bill Traylor. Those really stand on their own, I think, as works of art, separate from the fact that they are documentary objects as well. So I think the point is well taken, that in the 1930s, by that time, of course, I think there was beginning to be perceived, even in places that were a little less sophisticated, the use of photography to kind of bridge a gap between what people saw as fine art, paintings in a museum, drawings on a wall that ladies would walk in their Sunday finery with their hat. They were beginning to build a bridge toward that for exhibition in museums like as we have it today. And I know you, for those of you who do not know, that is Professor Powell, who will be speaking tomorrow, and you need to come and hear him because he's going to do a much better job than I can of articulating the importance of making sure that museums evolve what they show, how they show it, how art historians look at work, the environment that produced it, and not staying stagnant in terms of how you perceive what these artists were doing and the tools that they were using to do it. Absolutely, I think that's true. So photography is probably one of those steps that took place, maybe that made a little more sense to the general public than the idea of recycling material into works of art, which of course eventually becomes a centerpiece. And when we were talking in the gallery earlier today, you were talking, I actually wanted to point out before we ran out of time, Bill Traylor was the original recycler, right? He was taking cardboard out of a trash bin. That was his material. Now he was given other things but he clearly, given the breadth of the work that you see, he clearly preferred working on cast-off board. So you're right, it started very early, didn't it? Okay, anything? Yes, certainly.
Okay, hold on. Wait till I get to you. Wait.
That girl is running in high heels. Don't make her do that.
I've read that Charles Shannon collected about 1,500 objects of Bill Traylor.
It was around that number, I think, yeah.
Did
Close.
anybody else collect Bill Traylor? Or have anyone else's purchases passed down to us?
You know, apparently a few people did. There were not many of them, but some other members of New South apparently did purchase some work and save it. But they were not many in number. And unfortunately, the work that he made when he moved from the streets in with his daughter on Bragg Street, that work apparently was not saved. So really all that we have that we can document are those pieces that were saved by Charles Shannon. And then a few things. I know Ben Baldwin, who was his sister here in town, Betty Baldwin, had a couple of Bill Traylors that Ben had saved. So, you know, in some ways, those things were saved more as mementos, I imagine, rather than saving them specifically. They were works of art that they kept because they were works of art that they wanted to keep for probably personal reasons. So they weren't really saved as documentation of the quality of his work and his ability as an artist. And that always was Charles Shannon's intention, was to save this work so that it would be recognized one day as for the quality and the importance of the work that it was, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Margaret Lynne.
Yes, ma'am.
And to close out our day, we have 2 gallery talks out here, one with Margaret Lynne, so if you'd like to spend more time with her, you're welcome to do that, and Charles Shannon, and that will be in the Wilson Orientation Gallery. If you can go through these doors, take a left, then a right, and another left, and you'll get there. And we also have Chester Higgins, who will be giving a gallery talk, and that will be in the permanent galleries. So if you go through the rotunda and just keep walking straight, just walk straight back. Yes. And so for those who have not purchased books yet, one more thing, and then I'll let you go. Alabama Press is packed up, but Red Herring is still available for purchases. So, and they'll be back tomorrow. All right, thank you very much.